The first thing I remember is the heat. Not the obvious kind, not skin against skin, but the slow, suffocating heat of being alone with him when the world finally stepped away. 3 days. That was all it took. 3 days trapped in the same space with a man who had buried his desire so deep it had hardened into silence, and with a woman who had learned her entire life how to endure without asking. It began before I understood what it would become. New York woke that morning wrapped in damp gray light, the kind that clings to your clothes and settles into your lungs. I stood pressed against the pole of a crowded subway car, my fingers tight around my worn leather bag, my breath uneven, my thoughts drifting somewhere they had no right to go. I wasn't listening to music, though my earbuds were tangled in my hand. I was listening to myself, my pulse, my restraint, the quiet tension that had lived in me for years. My name is Elena Morales. I was 27 then. I didn't know yet that everything I believed about control, distance, and silence was about to unravel. The train lurched forward, and for a moment my balance slipped. I caught myself quickly, but the sensation lingered, that feeling of being just slightly off, as if something invisible had shifted beneath my feet. When I emerged near Midtown, the city felt sharper, colder. Glass towers rose like monuments to power and exclusion, and one of them belonged to the firm that employed me, Harrington and Blackwell, one of the most respected legal institutions in Manhattan. Each morning I felt the same contradiction tightening in my chest. Pride for having made it there, fear that I never truly belonged. The lobby smelled of polished stone and expensive perfume. Shoes clicked with purpose. Voices carried confidence I had learned to imitate, but never fully owned. The receptionist barely acknowledged me. She never did. To her I was temporary, replaceable, someone passing through a world that was not meant to open its doors all the way. The elevator ride up was silent, too silent. I stared at my reflection in the mirrored wall, dark eyes, hair pulled back neatly, a face that didn't demand attention, but held it if someone looked long enough. I straightened my coat, cheap but clean, and inhaled deeply. Another day of proving myself, another day of surviving. The moment the elevator doors opened onto the executive floor, the air changed. It always did. Power had a scent. Coffee, paper, ambition, and something heavier, expectation. Assistants moved quickly. Lawyers spoke in low, urgent tones. Phones rang without mercy. I stepped into my shared office space and took my seat, organizing my desk with deliberate calm. "Running late again," came a voice behind me, smooth and sharp at the same time. I didn't turn immediately. I already knew who it was. Claire Whitmore stood there, flawless as ever. Designer dress, perfect hair, a smile that never reached her eyes. "It's 8 o'clock, I replied, checking my watch. "Right on time." She tilted her head. "When you come from where you come from, Eleanor, punctual isn't enough. You should arrive early. People like us don't get the benefit of doubt." Her smile cut deeper than any insult spoken aloud. I swallowed my response, I always did, because I had learned long ago that silence was sometimes the only armor available. I logged into my computer and pulled up the agenda for the day of Jonathan Harrington. Just seeing his name altered the rhythm of the office. Jonathan Harrington was more than a senior partner. He was the firm's foundation. Brilliant, untouchable, feared. Clients trusted him with reputations, fortunes, entire lives. His presence alone could bend a courtroom. And he was a widower. No one spoke about it openly, but everyone knew. 5 years earlier, his wife had died suddenly, and since then, something in him had closed completely. He lived for work. He slept little. He spoke less. He demanded perfection and gave nothing away, except control. A few minutes later, Margaret Blackwell, another senior partner, appeared at my desk without warning. She scanned my screen, her gaze clinical. "This better be flawless," she said coolly. "Mistakes cost money here, and some of us can't afford them." "I understand," I answered, my voice steady even as my stomach tightened. Then, without announcement, without drama, the door to Jonathan's office opened. The floor seemed to hold its breath. He stepped out in a dark suit tailored precisely to his frame, his posture rigid, his face carved from restraint, tall, broad-shouldered. His eyes carried exhaustion, but also something else, something distant and aching if you knew how to look. "Good morning," he said. The chorus of greetings followed instantly. When his gaze reached me, it paused. "Do we have everything ready for 9?" he asked. "Yes," I replied. "Documents are in your office, summaries sent." He nodded once. "You're thorough," he said quietly. It was nothing, just words. But to me it felt like oxygen. As he walked away, Claire leaned in close enough for only me to hear. "Don't confuse that for interest," she whispered. "Men like him don't see women like us." I didn't answer, because some part of me already knew she was wrong. The day blurred into urgency. Calls, contracts, revisions. I stayed long after most people left. The office grew quiet, shadows stretching across marble floors, the city glowing beyond the windows. That was when I felt him before I saw him. Jonathan stood beside my desk, his tie loosened, the top button of his shirt undone, less distant, more human. "You're still here," he said. "I wanted to make sure tomorrow runs smoothly." He studied me for a moment, then spoke softly. "You don't have to give your life to this place." I smiled faintly. "Life has taken its payment elsewhere." The words escaped before I could stop them. Something shifted in his eyes. "Go home," he said gently. "Tomorrow may be important." I watched him leave, unaware that those words were the first crack in everything I believed was sealed shut. 3 days. That was all it took for silence to turn into fire. And this moment, was where it truly began. Desire does not announce itself all at once. It seeps in quietly, disguising itself as routine, as professionalism, as coincidence. That is how it happened with Jonathan and me. The morning after he told me tomorrow might be important, I arrived earlier than usual, not because Claire's words still echoed in my head, but because something restless had woken with me before dawn. The city outside my small apartment was still half asleep, lights blinking lazily, streets damp from a light overnight rain. I stood by the window for a moment longer than necessary, breathing in the calm, trying to slow the unease that felt too much like anticipation. At the office, the atmosphere was different, tighter, quieter. Whispers passed between desks without names attached. A major international case was circulating through the firm like an electric current, unspoken, but felt everywhere. Doors remained closed. Partners moved with sharper focus. Assistants typed faster, spoke less. Jonathan's door stayed shut all morning. I worked through emails, prepared folders, reviewed contracts line by line. Precision had always been my refuge. When my hands were busy, my mind obeyed. But that morning, my thoughts kept drifting, to the way his voice had softened the night before, to the way he had looked at me as if he had seen something no one else had noticed. If you're still here with me, feeling everything I'm feeling, take a second and leave a like on this video. It tells me you understand this moment, this tension, this quiet fire that changes everything. Your like helps this story keep breathing. Just before noon, his door opened. He stood there, jacket on, expression unreadable. "Eleanor," he said, his voice firm but calm, "I need you in the conference room." My heart responded before my mind did. Inside the room, sunlight filtered through tall windows, reflecting off the polished table. Papers were spread in careful order. Jonathan moved with controlled purpose, gesturing for me to sit beside him, not across, beside. That alone changed something. For over an hour, we worked through details, dates, figures, strategy. He spoke with his usual authority, but there were moments, brief, almost imperceptible, when his gaze lingered on me, when his hand paused mid-motion as if listening for something unspoken. I anticipated his needs without being asked. When he searched for a document, it was already in my hand. When he hesitated on a figure, I offered it quietly. Our rhythm aligned with unsettling ease. "You know this case well," he said at one point. "I've been following it closely," I replied. A pause. That's not what I meant. The silence between us thickened, not uncomfortable, charged. When the meeting ended, he stood a little too close as we gathered the papers. I could feel the warmth of him without touching, the subtle awareness of shared space. My breath caught, just slightly. He noticed. "Good work," he said, his tone lower than before. As I left the room, I realized my hands were trembling. That afternoon, news became confirmation. The international client had chosen Harrington and Blackwell. The case would require travel, long days, absolute discretion. Jonathan called me into his office just before 6. "I'll need you with me," he said, not looking up from the documents. "Your passport valid?" "Yes." "Clear your schedule starting Thursday." I nodded, my pulse loud in my ears. When I returned to my desk, Claire was watching me. Her eyes narrowed, calculating. "So," she said casually, "traveling now?" "Yes," I answered simply. Her smile tightened. Careful proximity confuses people. I didn't respond. I couldn't, because confusion was no longer the right word. The flight was early. At the airport, Jonathan arrived with the same controlled composure he wore everywhere else. We spoke of logistics, timelines, expectations. Nothing personal, nothing unnecessary. Yet seated beside him on the plane, shoulder almost touching, I became acutely aware of every small movement. The rise and fall of his chest, the quiet focus in his eyes as he reviewed documents. The way the air between us felt warmer than it should have. When the plane landed in Venice, the city greeted us with water instead of roads, with echoes instead of noise. The pace slowed instantly, as if the place itself demanded patience. Our hotel overlooked a canal that shimmered under the late afternoon light. The rooms were separate, the arrangement professional and unspoken. I placed my bag down and sat on the edge of the bed for a moment, hands resting on my knees, grounding myself. This was work, nothing more. The meetings began early the next day. Long hours in elegant rooms, voices in multiple languages, negotiations unfolding like careful dances. Jonathan led with precision. I supported silently, efficiently, always present. He relied on me more openly here, asked for my opinion in low tones, waited for my confirmation before moving forward. The trust between us deepened with each hour. By late afternoon, we stepped outside into golden light. The city glowed, reflections trembling across the water. Jonathan stopped walking suddenly, as if remembering how to breathe. "You did exceptionally well today," he said. "I did my job. You did more than that." We walked side by side along a narrow street. People passed. Laughter drifted from cafes. Music floated faintly in the distance. Life moved around us, unaware. On a small bridge, I stumbled slightly on uneven stone. Instinctively, Jonathan reached out, his hand closing around my arm to steady me. The contact was brief, but it lingered. I felt it in my chest, in my breath, in the sudden heat beneath my skin. "I'm fine," I said softly. "I know," he replied. We didn't move immediately. His hand remained there a moment longer than necessary. When he released me, something unspoken stayed behind. That evening, we reviewed documents separately but close. Doors open, voices low, occasional knocks. At one point, he handed me a corrected file. Our fingers brushed. A simple accident. Neither of us apologized. When I finally lay down that night, the bed sheets twisted beneath me. My body heavy with exhaustion and something else, something restless. I stared at the ceiling, replaying moments, gestures, silences. Desire, I realized, was not loud. It was patient. The second day in Venice unfolded under gray skies. Meetings intensified. Pressure mounted. Jonathan carried it all with controlled strength, but I noticed moments when his focus drifted, when his gaze rested on the water too long. That evening, in a quiet cafe away from tourists, he leaned back in his chair and closed his eyes briefly. "It's been a long day," he admitted. I nodded. "I can take over the rest." He looked at me then, not as my superior, not as a partner, but as a man allowing himself to be seen. "Thank you." We spoke of small things afterward, the city, language, getting lost. He smiled once, a real smile, fleeting but genuine. It changed the shape of his face. Walking back to the hotel, music echoed through narrow streets. A violin somewhere unseen. The night wrapped around us gently. At our doors we paused. "Good night," he said. "Good night," I replied. Inside my room, I pressed my back against the door and closed my eyes. My body felt warm, alert, alive. Desire had taken root, not rushed, not reckless, but undeniable. It was no longer just tension. It was waiting. Tension does not arrive suddenly. It accumulates layer by layer until every breath feels heavier, every silence louder, every glance loaded with meaning. By the third morning in Venice, the city seemed to move more slowly, as if it sensed what neither Jonathan nor I had yet named. A soft mist hovered over the canals, blurring edges, softening lines. I woke before my alarm, my body alert, my thoughts tangled in memories of the day before. His hand on my arm, the way his voice had lowered when he admitted his fatigue, that smile, brief, unguarded. I stood by the window for a long moment, watching a gondola pass beneath the pale light, and tried to steady myself. This was still work. But my body no longer believed that lie as easily as my mind repeated it. Downstairs, Jonathan was already waiting in the lobby, impeccably dressed, his posture straight, his expression controlled. Yet when our eyes met, something flickered. Recognition, perhaps. Awareness. "Good morning," he said. "Good morning." We walked out together into the quiet street, our steps naturally aligning. No rush, no unnecessary words. The closeness felt different now, not accidental, not merely convenient. It felt chosen, even if neither of us had acknowledged it. The meetings that day were the most demanding yet. Negotiations tightened. Voices rose, then softened. Stakes sharpened. Jonathan remained composed, his arguments precise, his authority unquestioned. I sat beside him, tracking every shift, anticipating needs before they surfaced. More than once, his knee brushed mine beneath the table. Each time, neither of us moved away. The contact was subtle, easily dismissed by anyone else, but my body registered every brush, every fleeting touch, as if marking time. My skin felt warmer. My focus sharpened painfully. During a break, we stepped out onto a narrow balcony overlooking the water. The air was cool, damp with salt and stone. "So you're handling this pressure remarkably well," he said, leaning against the railing. "So are you." He exhaled slowly. "I'm used to pressure." "I know." He turned to look at me, then really look. His gaze held something searching, as if weighing the risk of a thought he had carried too long. "I see more than most people," he said quietly. "I listen," I replied. His jaw tightened slightly, a small sign but telling. We stood there in silence, the city breathing around us. I could feel the restraint in him, the way he held himself back with practiced discipline. It was the same discipline that drew me closer, even as it warned me away. That afternoon passed in a blur of signatures and final confirmations. By the time we returned to the hotel, dusk had settled, and the city glowed softly beneath lantern light. Jonathan stopped in the hallway outside the elevator. "Walk with me," he said. It wasn't an order. It wasn't even a request. It was an invitation. We left the hotel and wandered without direction, letting narrow streets guide us. The stones beneath our feet were uneven, worn smooth by centuries of passing lives. The air carried the scent of water and something sweet drifting from an unseen cafe. For the first time since we'd arrived, we weren't talking about work. He commented on the architecture. I mentioned how the city felt like it was listening. He smiled faintly at that. "You feel things deeply," he said. "I always have. That can be dangerous." "I know." We stopped at the edge of a canal, the water reflecting broken lines of light. Jonathan rested his hands on the stone railing, his shoulders tense in a way I hadn't seen before. "There are things," he began, then stopped. I waited. "There are things I've avoided saying for a long time." I didn't press him. I simply stayed where I was, close enough to feel his presence without touching. The space between us felt charged, fragile. "After my wife died," he continued, his voice low, "I learned how to function without feeling." The words settled heavily between us. "I built a life around that decision," he said. "Work, routine, control, it kept everything contained." I nodded, my chest tightening. "And now?" I asked gently. His gaze dropped to the water. "Now I feel something shifting, and that terrifies me." The honesty in his voice stripped away any pretense. This wasn't the powerful attorney speaking. This was a man standing at the edge of something he didn't know how to survive again. I stepped closer, not touching, just near enough for him to feel that he wasn't alone. "You don't have to explain anything," I said softly. "You don't have to decide anything." He turned toward me then. Our faces were closer than they had ever been, breaths almost aligning. "I don't know how to want without losing control," he admitted. I met his gaze, my voice steady despite the heat spreading through me. "Wanting doesn't mean surrendering." For a long moment, neither of us moved. The city around us seemed to fade, leaving only the sound of water and the quiet rhythm of our breathing. Then slowly, carefully, Jonathan lifted his hand and brushed his knuckles against my cheek. It was barely a touch, a question more than a gesture. I didn't pull away. My skin burned where he touched me, not from pressure but from restraint. His thumb hovered near my jaw, never quite crossing the line between suggestion and certainty. "I've missed this," he murmured, almost to himself. "Being close?" I asked. "Being human." The word landed deep. He lowered his hand as if afraid of what another second might invite. We stepped back from each other, the moment suspended, unresolved. That night, sleep refused to come easily. I lay tangled in the sheets, the room warm, my body restless. Every small sound felt amplified. My thoughts circled endlessly around him, his voice, his confession, the restraint that made every gesture ache with meaning. In the next room, he was awake too. I sensed it without knowing how. The following morning was the last day of meetings, the most decisive. Everything moved quickly, efficiently. The case closed successfully before noon. Relief rippled through the group. Handshakes were exchanged, smiles appeared. But beneath the professional triumph, something else pulsed. Anticipation, unresolved tension. When we finally stepped outside, the sky had cleared. Sunlight reflected sharply off the water, bright and unforgiving. "We have some time," Jonathan said, "before we leave." I hesitated only a moment. "Okay." We walked until the streets opened into a quiet square. No crowds, just space. Jonathan stopped and turned toward me fully. "Eleanor," he said, using my name with a weight that made my breath catch. "There's something I need to say before we go back." I waited, my heart pounding. "I don't regret what I'm feeling," he said, "but I'm afraid of it." "I am too," I admitted. "That doesn't make it wrong." "No," I agreed. "It makes it real. He stepped closer. So did I. Our bodies aligned naturally, instinctively. The air between us felt electric. Slowly, deliberately, he leaned in and pressed his forehead gently against mine. No kiss. Not yet. Just closeness, warmth, breath shared in silence. "I don't want to hurt you," he whispered. "You won't," I replied, surprising myself with the certainty in my voice. His hands rested at my waist, not gripping, not claiming, just there, grounding, present. We stayed like that for a long moment, letting the tension rise without release, letting desire exist without demanding satisfaction. When he finally stepped back, his eyes were darker, deeper. "We should go," he said. I nodded, though every part of me wanted to stay suspended in that moment forever. As we walked back toward the hotel, I understood something clearly for the first time. This was no longer just attraction. It was no longer just longing. It was a bond forming under pressure, quiet, dangerous, and impossible to ignore. And it was only just beginning. Proximity changes everything. It is no longer just the space between two bodies. It becomes the air that moves differently, the silence that tightens, the awareness that sharpens, until even restraint feels like touch. The return flight passed in a quiet suspension. Jonathan and I sat beside each other, close enough that our elbows nearly met, distant enough to pretend nothing had changed. We spoke only when necessary, about schedules, deadlines, the transition back to New York. Professional words carefully chosen, but every so often I felt his presence shift, a slow breath, a subtle tension in his shoulders. When turbulence shook the plane, his hand moved instinctively toward the armrest between us, stopping just short of touching mine. The restraint in that pause felt louder than any gesture. I stared out the window, watching clouds drift beneath us, my body alert in a way that felt both exhilarating and dangerous. I had learned to survive by keeping my distance, by measuring every step. Now distance itself felt like a challenge. When we landed, the city welcomed us back with its familiar urgency. Noise, movement, steel and glass pressing in. It should have grounded me. Instead, it heightened everything. At the office, nothing appeared different. Same marble floors, same measured greetings, same unspoken hierarchy. But beneath the surface, the air felt charged, as if something fragile had been introduced, and no one knew where it would settle. Jonathan returned to his routine seamlessly. Meetings stacked, calls lined up, decisions made without hesitation. Yet I noticed the small shifts others missed. The way his gaze softened when it landed on me. The way he waited an extra second before speaking when I was nearby. The way he never raised his voice when addressing me, even under pressure. And I noticed how aware I had become of my own body. The way my breath changed when he stood behind me at my desk. The way my skin warmed when our paths crossed in narrow hallways. The way silence stretched when our eyes met, as if neither of us wanted to be the first to look away. Claire noticed too. She said nothing at first, just watched, observed. Her smiles grew sharper, her comments more carefully timed. She lingered near my desk when Jonathan was around, her presence calculated, her laughter slightly too loud. One afternoon, as I gathered files from the printer room, Jonathan stepped inside behind me, closing the door softly. The room was small, warm from the machines, the hum filling the silence. For a moment we stood too close. I could feel the heat of him at my back, his breath slow and controlled. My body reacted before my mind could intervene, my shoulders stiffening slightly, my pulse quickening. "Sorry," he said quietly, though he didn't move away immediately. "It's fine," I replied, my voice softer than intended. The printer whirred, spitting out pages at a painfully slow pace. Neither of us reached for them. "I've been thinking about Venice," he said suddenly. My fingers tightened around the folder in my hands. "So have I." A pause. "We crossed lines there," he continued carefully. "Not physically, but something shifted." "Yes." "I need to know," he said, lowering his voice, "that you're okay with that." I turned slowly to face him. The space between us narrowed further, filled with unspoken emotion. "I am," I said, "as long as we're honest." His gaze searched mine, intense and steady. "I don't know how to do this halfway." "Neither do I." The printer finished its task with a sharp beep, breaking the moment. Jonathan stepped back immediately, his composure snapping into place. "We should keep this professional," he said. "Yes," I agreed, though the word tasted complicated. That evening I stayed late again. It had become routine, my quiet hours after the office emptied. The building softened at night. Lights dimmed, sounds faded. I worked more slowly, allowing myself to breathe. I sensed him before I saw him. Jonathan stood in the doorway of my office space, his jacket off, sleeves rolled up. Less armor, more man. "You should go home," he said gently. In a minute. He walked closer, stopping at the edge of my desk. Not too close, close enough. You've been carrying a lot, he said, here and elsewhere. So have you. A silence settled, thick and intimate. Do you ever feel, he began, then hesitated, like you've lived your life holding your breath? The question caught me off guard. Yes, I answered honestly. All the time. His eyes darkened slightly. He leaned back against the desk, his hands braced beside him, the posture unguarded. I thought I had mastered restraint, he said, but lately it feels like something is pressing against it from the inside. I stood slowly, closing my laptop, grounding myself. Restraint can only hold so much. Our eyes locked. The distance between us felt suddenly deliberate, charged with intention. I won't touch you, he said quietly. Not unless you ask. My breath caught. I know. And I won't ask, he added. Neither of us moved. The air felt heavy, warm. I could feel my heartbeat in my throat, my chest rising and falling faster than I wanted. Desire simmered just beneath the surface. Not urgent, not wild, but deep and steady. I should go, I said finally. Yes, he agreed, though his voice betrayed reluctance. As I passed him, our shoulders brushed. A simple accident, a shock that traveled through me like heat. I didn't look back. At home, sleep came in fragments. My bed felt too big, the sheets tangled beneath restless movement. I dreamed of closeness without clarity, of standing near him, of breath shared, of hands hovering without touching. The next days followed a similar pattern. Work, silence, glances held too long, conversations layered with meaning. Jonathan never crossed a line. He respected every boundary with painful discipline, and yet his presence filled every room he shared with me. One morning, during a meeting, his hand slid across the table, passing me a note. Professional, brief, but our fingers touched. Just for a second. My body reacted instantly. A rush of warmth, a tightening low in my chest. I pulled my hand back carefully, my expression unchanged. No one noticed, except him. That night, we found ourselves alone again in the building. A power outage dimmed the lights unexpectedly, plunging the floor into soft darkness, illuminated only by emergency lamps. I stood near the window, watching the city glow below. Jonathan joined me quietly, the silence between us thick with awareness. The city looks different like this, he said. So do people. He turned to me, his face partially shadowed. Elena, he said softly, if this becomes too much. I'll tell you, I interrupted gently, and so will you. He nodded, relief flickering across his features. We stood side by side, close enough that our arms nearly touched. I could feel the heat of him, steady and grounding. My body responded instinctively, leaning just slightly in his direction. He noticed, but didn't move. Minutes passed like that. Two people standing in shared silence, desire pulsing quietly between them, neither willing to break it. When the lights returned, the moment dissolved. But it didn't disappear. It stayed with us, pressed into memory, into muscle, into breath. Proximity had become its own language, and we were learning how to speak it without saying a word. Desire has a way of leaving traces, not marks on skin, not evidence anyone else could see, but signs written into the body, into the rhythm of breath, into the way a bed looks in the morning when sleep was never truly found. By the time the 5th day after Venice arrived, exhaustion had settled into my bones in a way that felt different from simple overwork. My body was tired, yes, but alert, sensitive, as if it had been awake for far too long, waiting for something it refused to name out loud. That morning I woke tangled in my sheets, the fabric twisted around my legs, one pillow abandoned on the floor. The room smelled faintly of warm skin and restless night air. I lay there for a long moment, staring at the ceiling, my breath slow but uneven. I had dreamed of Jonathan again. Not of anything explicit, never that. Just closeness, standing too near, his shirt undone at the collar, the weight of his presence filling a room until there was no space left for anything else. I showered longer than usual, letting the warm water run over my shoulders, trying to wash away the lingering tension. It didn't help. Desire clung quietly, settling beneath my skin like heat after sun exposure, no longer burning, but impossible to forget. At the office, everything looked the same, and yet it wasn't. Jonathan was already in his office when I arrived. Door open, jacket draped over the chair, sleeves rolled up. The sight of his forearms, bare, strong, marked faintly by veins, sent a familiar warmth through me that I had learned to mask quickly. We exchanged a brief greeting, professional, neutral, but when I passed his doorway, I felt his eyes follow me. The day unfolded slowly, deliberately. Meetings, documents, conversations layered with meaning only we seemed to hear. Every time we were in the same room, the air felt heavier, warmer, as if the space itself remembered what had almost happened, what still hovered just out of reach. By late afternoon, the building grew quieter. People left in pairs and clusters, laughter echoing faintly down hallways. I stayed. Jonathan stayed. It had become unspoken routine. Around 8, I finally closed my laptop, rubbing my temples. The office lights cast long shadows across the floor, softening sharp edges, making the place feel less rigid, more human. I stood to leave when I heard his voice behind me. "Elena." I turned. He stood a few feet away, jacket still off, his tie loosened. His hair looked slightly disheveled, as if he had run a hand through it too many times. "You look exhausted," he said. "So do you." A pause. "There's no reason for you to stay this late," he added gently. I smiled faintly. "There never is." He studied me for a moment, then nodded. "Come here." Not an order, an invitation. I followed him into his office. The room felt different at night, quieter, warmer, stripped of its daytime authority. The city lights glowed through the tall windows, reflections trembling on the glass. He poured 2 glasses of water and handed one to me. Our fingers brushed lightly. Neither of us commented. "You should sit," he said. I did, perching on the edge of the chair across from his desk. He leaned against the desk instead of sitting behind it, closing the distance without fully crossing it. "Venice changed something," he said quietly. "Yes." I thought coming back would make it fade. It didn't. No. Silence filled the room, not awkward, not empty, charged. The kind of silence that carries weight. "I haven't slept well," he admitted suddenly. Neither had I. "My bed feels unfamiliar," he continued, "like it doesn't recognize me anymore." The confession was small, but it struck deep. "I know that feeling," I said softly. His gaze lifted to mine, held. The restraint in his eyes was unmistakable, tightly wound, deliberate. "I keep imagining," he said slowly, "what it would feel like to stop holding back." My breath caught, but I didn't look away. "And then I don't," he added, "because once I do, I don't know if I'll be able to pull myself together again." The honesty in his voice made my chest ache. "You don't have to decide tonight," I said. "I know." The clock on the wall ticked quietly, marking time neither of us wanted to acknowledge. "I should go," I said, finally standing. He nodded, though something in his expression tightened. As I passed him, the space between us narrowed. I could feel the heat of his body, the tension held just beneath his skin. For a moment, just a moment, I thought he might reach for me. He didn't. That night my apartment felt too small, the bed too warm. I lay down fully clothed, then kicked the covers away, then pulled them back again. The sheets tangled around me as I shifted restlessly, my body slick with a thin sheen of sweat from the summer air, and something else entirely. I imagined him in his own bed, sleepless, restless, sheets twisted, body carrying the same quiet ache. The thought alone made my breath deepen. Morning came without rest. I woke with the sheets bunched beneath me, hair damp at the nape of my neck, heart beating too fast for someone who had done nothing at all. I lay there, staring at the ceiling, feeling the weight of desire pressing gently but insistently from the inside. At work, Jonathan looked just as tired. There were faint shadows beneath his eyes, his movements slightly slower. When our gazes met, something passed between us, recognition perhaps, or shared knowing. We worked closely that day, preparing for a series of internal reviews. In the small conference room, the air conditioning malfunctioned, leaving the space warm and close. Jonathan loosened his tie and rolled his sleeves higher. I could see the faint sheen of sweat at his collarbone, the way his shirt clung slightly to his back. My own skin felt warm, sensitive, every nerve alert. We sat close, too close for comfort, not close enough for relief. Our shoulders nearly touched. At one point he shifted, his knee brushing mine beneath the table. This time neither of us moved away. The contact lingered, subtle but unmistakable. Heat traveled upward, settling low in my chest, spreading slowly. Jonathan's breathing changed just slightly. We finished the meeting without a word about it. That evening, a sudden summer storm broke over the city. Rain hammered against the windows, heavy and insistent. The building emptied quickly, people eager to escape before the streets flooded. I stayed. So did he. Thunder rolled in the distance as Jonathan stood by the window of his office, watching the rain blur the city lights. "You'll get soaked if you leave now," he said without turning. "I don't mind." He turned to face me. "I do." The words hung between us, weighted with more than concern. "Stay," he said quietly, "until it passes." I hesitated only a moment. "Okay." We sat in his office, not speaking, listening to the rain. The room grew warm, intimate. My skin prickled. a thin layer of sweat forming along my spine at my temples. Jonathan removed his jacket and draped it over the back of the chair. His shirt clung slightly now, darkened at the edges. "I can feel it," he said suddenly. "Feel what?" I asked, though I already knew. "This tension," he replied. "It's everywhere, in my body and my thoughts." My throat tightened. "Me too." He stepped closer, not touching, just close enough that the air between us felt thick, heavy with breath and unspoken need. "If I move any closer," he said, his voice low, controlled, "I won't be able to pretend this is nothing." "I don't want you to pretend," I whispered. The room felt too small, the rain louder, my skin warm, damp, sensitive to every shift of air. Jonathan closed his eyes briefly, as if steadying himself. When he opened them, the restraint was still there, but stretched thin. "Go home," he said hoarsely, "before I forget how to stop." I nodded, my body aching with the effort of turning away. That night my bed was chaos. Sheets tangled, pillow clutched then discarded, my body slick with sweat, muscles tight with unspent energy. I lay on my back, staring into the dark, breath shallow, every sense alive. I didn't touch myself. I didn't need to. The desire itself was enough, burning, contained, alive. Somewhere across the city I knew he was awake too. And the beds we lay in, unmade and restless, bore silent witness to a closeness that had not yet happened, but already felt impossible to undo. Conflict does not always come from the outside. Sometimes it grows quietly inside the chest, tightening with every breath until the heart itself feels divided. By the time the 6th day unfolded, I understood that what was happening between Jonathan and me could no longer be managed with silence alone. Desire had stopped being just sensation. It had become thought, memory, anticipation, and with that came fear. Sharp, deliberate, unavoidable. That morning, I woke before the sun, my body heavy with exhaustion that sleep had not touched. The room was still dark, the city outside barely stirring. I lay on my side, knees drawn slightly inward, the sheets cool against my skin. For the first time since Venice, my thoughts were not filled with his presence alone. They were filled with doubt. What were we doing? I had spent my entire life building something fragile but hard-earned, my independence, my place, my sense of worth in a world that constantly reminded me I did not belong. Jonathan Harrington was not just a man. He was power. He was risk. He was a line I had never intended to approach, much less hover beside, and yet every part of me had already crossed it. In the shower, I pressed my forehead against the cool tile and let the water run longer than necessary. My skin was sensitive, my nerves awake, my thoughts restless. Desire had become familiar. Fear was new. At the office, the building felt colder than usual, more rigid, as if the walls themselves had resumed their role as guardians of order, hierarchy, consequence. Jonathan arrived later than me that day. When he stepped onto the floor, his presence shifted the atmosphere instantly. He looked composed, as always, but there was something else beneath it, a tightness, a restraint sharpened by purpose. We did not speak at first. I focused on my work, grounding myself in routine, emails, schedules, deadlines. Precision had always been my shield, but even as my fingers moved across the keyboard, my awareness stayed fixed on him, on the sound of his footsteps, on the quiet intensity with which he closed his office door. He called me in mid-morning. "Eleanor," he said from behind his desk, his voice calm. "Sit." I did. For a moment he said nothing. He simply looked at me, his hands folded neatly in front of him, his posture impeccable. "I need to address something," he said finally. My chest tightened. "So do I replied, surprising both of us. He paused, then nodded once. "Go ahead." I took a breath, steadying myself. "What's happening between us, whatever it is, it can't exist without consequences." His jaw tightened slightly. "I'm aware. I don't want to be the reason people question your integrity," I continued. "Or mine." His gaze sharpened, not with anger, but with intensity. "No one has questioned your integrity." "Not yet," I said quietly, "but they will." Silence stretched between us, heavy with truth. "Do you think I haven't considered that?" he asked softly. "That I don't wake up every morning reminding myself of everything at stake?" "I don't doubt that," I said. "But wanting something doesn't make it safe." "No," he agreed. "It makes it honest." I looked away, the weight of his words pressing against my chest. "Honesty doesn't protect people from getting hurt. Neither does avoidance," he replied. His words landed deep, echoing against memories I hadn't expected to surface, of being overlooked, underestimated, reminded subtly and not so subtly that I was disposable. "I've spent my life avoiding things that could cost me everything," I said, "because losing is not something I can afford." He leaned forward slightly. And I've spent mine avoiding things that could make me feel alive again. The confession stunned me. After my wife died, he continued quietly, I told myself that survival was enough. That control was strength. But lately control feels like a cage. I met his gaze again. The vulnerability there was unmistakable. And I'm afraid, he added, that if I open that door, I won't know how to close it. Fear flickered in me too, not of him, but of myself, of how deeply I already felt, of how quickly restraint was becoming effort instead of instinct. I don't want to be something that hurts you, I said. You aren't, he replied immediately. What hurts is pretending nothing is happening. We sat in silence, the air thick with conflict. Desire pulled us forward. Reason held us back. Both were relentless. When I stood to leave, my legs felt unsteady. Jonathan rose as well, stopping a few feet away, close enough to feel, far enough to resist. We need to slow this down, he said. Yes, I agreed. And we need to be clear, he added, with ourselves first. I nodded, though clarity felt elusive. The rest of the day passed under a strange tension. Jonathan remained focused, efficient, distant in the way only disciplined men can be. I mirrored him, professional, composed, careful. But inside everything churned, Claire noticed immediately. You look distracted, she said casually as we passed in the hallway. Careful, that never ends well. I ignored her, but the words followed me. That evening I went home earlier than usual. I needed space, distance, time to think. My apartment was quiet, the city outside glowing faintly through the window. I cooked without appetite, ate without tasting. My thoughts circled endlessly around the same questions. Was I imagining more than existed? Was this connection worth the risk? Was I strong enough to walk away? I sat on the edge of my bed, hands clasped, breathing slowly. Desire was still there, steady, insistent, but now it was braided tightly with fear. I imagined Jonathan alone in his office, his posture rigid, his expression controlled, fighting the same battle from the other side. The next morning, the tension broke, not through touch, but through truth. Jonathan asked me to stay after work. The building emptied slowly, lights dimmed. The world outside softened into night. When I entered his office, he was standing by the window, his back to me. I've been unfair, he said without turning. I stopped just inside the door. How? I've allowed my feelings to exist without giving you certainty, he replied, and that's not right. I said nothing, waiting. I need to know, he continued, that if we move forward even cautiously, you're not doing it out of fear of losing something. I swallowed hard. I'm doing it because I feel something I can't dismiss. He turned then, his expression serious, searching. And I need to know, I added, that you're not reaching for me because you're afraid of being alone. His eyes darkened. I'm afraid of being closed forever. The honesty between us felt raw, exposed. I don't want secrecy, he said. I don't want imbalance. I don't want you to feel smaller because of me. My throat tightened. Then don't make me. Silence stretched between us, thick and deliberate. I can't promise this will be easy, he said, or clean. I don't need easy, I replied. I need real. We stood there, not touching, not retreating. Two people acknowledging the weight of what they were choosing to consider. This isn't just desire anymore, he said softly. No, I agreed, it's responsibility. And risk. Yes. And possibility, he added. That word lingered. When I left his office that night, my heart felt heavy but steady. The conflict inside me had not disappeared, but it had taken shape. It had become something I could face instead of something that ruled me. I knew then that whatever happened next would not be accidental. It would be chosen. And that knowledge made everything feel more dangerous and more alive than ever before. Some moments do not explode. They unfold. They arrive quietly, dressed in calm, carrying a weight so profound that the body understands before the mind can follow. What happened between Jonathan and me did not come from urgency or impulse. It came from accumulation, from every look held too long, every word restrained, every night spent awake with desire folded carefully into silence. The day it happened, the city was unusually still. New York often roars, even in its quietest hours, but that morning the streets below my apartment moved with a softened rhythm, as if something had asked them to slow down. I noticed it as I dressed, choosing my clothes with more care than usual, not to impress, but to steady myself. My reflection looked the same, yet I felt altered, aware that something inside me had reached its limit. At the office, Jonathan was already there. His door was open, the lights low, the city reflected faintly in the glass behind him. When he looked up and saw me, his expression shifted. Not dramatically, but enough for me to know he felt it too. We exchanged only a brief greeting. Work filled the morning, but it moved around us rather than through us. Conversations happened, documents were signed, decisions were made, Yet beneath every interaction, a quiet inevitability grew. By late afternoon, a storm gathered outside. Not sudden, not violent, just heavy clouds pressing low against the skyline. The light in the office changed, shadows lengthening, edges softening. Jonathan called me in just before 6. "Close the door," he said gently. I did. The click of the latch sounded louder than it should have. He stood by his desk, not behind it. No barrier between us. His jacket was off, his sleeves rolled up, his tie loosened. He looked tired, but not weary, focused, as if he had made a decision he was no longer willing to delay. "I've been thinking about what you said," he began. "So have I replied. He nodded. "I don't want to live in hesitation anymore." My breath slowed. "Neither do I." Silence settled between us, not tense, not strained. Full, like a held breath finally ready to release. "I don't want to rush this," he said, "but I also don't want to keep pretending it's nothing." I stepped closer, not touching, just near enough to feel the warmth of him, the quiet strength held in restraint. "It's not nothing," I said softly. His gaze dropped briefly to my lips, then returned to my eyes. The honesty there was unmistakable. "I need to know," he said, "that if I take one step forward, you'll meet me there." "I will," I answered without hesitation. That was all it took. He moved slowly, deliberately, as if every inch mattered. One hand lifted, not claiming, not pulling, just resting lightly at my waist. The contact was gentle, grounding, sending a quiet rush of warmth through me. I placed my hands against his chest, feeling the steady beat of his heart beneath my palms. He inhaled sharply, the sound barely audible, but I felt it through him. We stood like that for a moment, close, breathing together, letting the reality of the contact settle. No rush, no urgency, just presence. When he leaned in, it was unhurried. His forehead rested against mine, our breaths mingling, our bodies aligned without pressure. "This is where I stopped believing I could ever stand again," he murmured. "After her." My chest tightened with empathy. "And this is where you start standing differently," I replied. He lifted his head slightly, just enough to look at me. His eyes were dark, open, unguarded. The kiss came slowly. Not hungry, not demanding, just lips meeting with careful intention. It was soft at first, exploratory, as if both of us were relearning how to touch. When he deepened it, it wasn't with force, but with surrender. Years of restraint easing into something warm and real. I felt it everywhere, in my chest, in my breath, in the way my body leaned instinctively into his. His hand slid slightly at my waist, steadying me, holding me close without pulling me forward. My fingers curled lightly into the fabric of his shirt, not gripping, just anchoring myself to the moment. We parted only when breathing became necessary. He rested his forehead against mine again, eyes closed. "I didn't know it could feel like this," he whispered. "Like what?" "Like I'm not breaking anything by wanting." Emotion surged in me, tender, overwhelming, precise. I leaned in again, pressing my lips to his cheek, then to the corner of his mouth. Each touch was intentional, slow, reverent. The air around us felt warm, thick with shared heat. He exhaled, his hands firming slightly at my waist, his body responding without urgency but without denial. Outside, rain began to fall, soft at first, then steady. The sound wrapped around us, sealing the room in its rhythm. Jonathan guided me gently toward the sofa near the window. We sat, not collapsing, not rushing, just settling into closeness. His arm rested along the back, his body angled toward mine. My knee brushed his thigh. The contact sent a familiar warmth through me, but this time there was no need to pull away. We kissed again, deeper now but still controlled. The world narrowed to breath and warmth, to the quiet certainty of shared desire. Time blurred. At some point, I rested my head against his shoulder. His arm wrapped around me fully, holding me close, not possessive, just present. I could feel the heat of him, the subtle tension in his body, the restraint still there, but no longer rigid. "I've missed this," he said quietly. "Being close?" "Being seen." The words undid me. I turned toward him, meeting his gaze. "I see you." He smiled faintly, something soft and real in the curve of his mouth. We stayed like that for a long time, bodies close, breathing steady, desire no longer a sharp ache but a deep, glowing warmth, the kind that doesn't demand release, the kind that simply exists. When we finally stood, the room felt changed, not dramatic, intimate, the sofa cushions slightly disturbed, the air warmer, our clothes slightly rumpled. Evidence, not of excess but of truth. Jonathan walked me to the door, his hand resting briefly at the small of my back. "This doesn't end tonight," he said. "No," I replied, "it begins." He leaned in, pressing a final, gentle kiss to my forehead, a promise more than a gesture. As I stepped into the hallway, My heart felt full in a way I hadn't known was possible. Not overwhelmed, not uncertain. Aligned. That night, my bed was still unmade. Sheets tangled, body warm. But when I lay down, sleep came easily for the first time in weeks. Because desire had reached its quiet peak. Not in urgency, not in chaos, but in something far more powerful. Connection. Resolution does not arrive with certainty. It arrives with acceptance. In the days that followed that quiet evening in Jonathan's office, nothing outwardly dramatic changed, yet everything felt different. The world had not shifted on its axis. The firm still functioned with the same precision. The city still moved with relentless urgency. But beneath the surface, something had settled into place, heavy and calm, like a truth finally allowed to exist. The morning after, I woke before my alarm, not with restlessness, but with clarity. My bed was still unmade, the sheets loosely tangled, the faint warmth of my body lingering in the fabric. I lay there for a moment, one hand resting on my chest, breathing steadily. For the first time in a long while, my thoughts did not race ahead in fear. They stayed with what was. At work, Jonathan greeted me as he always had, professional, composed, respectful. But when our eyes met, there was a quiet acknowledgement there, something understood without words. No secrecy, no urgency, just recognition. We did not touch. We did not need to. The tension that had once felt sharp and consuming had softened into something steadier, still present, still warm, but no longer demanding resolution through impulse. That, I realized, was what made it real. Over the next few days, we found a rhythm that felt deliberate and earned. Conversations remained professional in public spaces, but layered with a deeper awareness. In private moments, an office door briefly closed, a quiet walk through a hallway late at night, we spoke honestly, carefully, without theatrics. Jonathan surprised me most in his gentleness. "I don't want to rush what deserves care," he told me one evening as we stood near the window of his office, the city glowing below us. "I've lived too long either closing doors completely or forcing them open. I want to do this differently." "So do I," I replied. We spoke about boundaries, about timing, about the weight of consequence, not as obstacles but as realities to be respected. The conversations were not romantic in the conventional sense, yet they were deeply intimate. Each word felt like a step taken with intention, and in that intention, desire deepened rather than faded. Claire's presence grew sharper. She watched more closely now. Her observations no longer subtle. Comments surfaced in meetings, veiled references to professionalism, to perception, to optics. Nothing overt, nothing actionable, but enough to remind me of the precariousness of my position. One afternoon, as I returned from a conference room, she stopped me. "Be careful," she said quietly, her smile thin. "People notice patterns." "I'm aware," I replied evenly. "Good," she said, "because patterns can be misinterpreted." I walked away without responding, my spine straight, my pace unhurried. The fear that once might have shaken me no longer had the same power. I knew where I stood, and I knew who stood beside me. Jonathan noticed the shift immediately. That evening, he asked me to stay behind after most of the staff had left. The building grew quiet, the usual hum replaced by a softer, more human silence. "You've been under pressure," he said. "So have you." He nodded. "I should have addressed this sooner." "You did," I replied, "by not letting it define us." He considered that. "Still, I want to be clear with everyone if necessary." I studied his face, searching for hesitation. I found none. "I won't allow ambiguity to harm you," he said firmly, "or diminish what you've earned." The weight of his words settled into me slowly, not as relief but as grounding. "Thank you," I said quietly. We stood near each other, not touching, yet close enough to feel the shared warmth. Outside, the city lights flickered, steady and unremarkable. Inside, something had resolved, not into certainty, but into commitment. That night, when I returned home, my apartment felt different. The space no longer echoed with loneliness or restless anticipation. I cooked slowly, ate deliberately, moved through my routines with care. Before bed, I paused by the window, looking out at the city that had both tested and shaped me. I thought of the girl I had been, the one who learned early how to endure, how to stay quiet, how to survive without asking. She had done her job. Now it was my turn to live differently. The next week unfolded with quiet intensity. Jonathan and I continued to work closely, our collaboration seamless, our understanding deepened by honesty. The firm buzzed with its usual momentum, but something in the dynamic had shifted. People noticed, not the nature of our connection, but its effect. Jonathan listened more, spoke with measured patience. His authority remained intact, but it was no longer edged with cold distance. The atmosphere around him softened. People responded differently, and I noticed myself changing too. I no longer shrank in meetings. I spoke with clarity, with confidence, with the knowledge that my voice carried weight because it was earned, not borrowed, not granted. One evening, after a particularly long day, Jonathan and I walked together out of the building. The air was cool, the streets quieter than usual. "I don't want this to exist only in careful moments," he said as we walked, "but I also don't want to force it into the light before it's ready." "I understand," I replied. He stopped near a small park. The city noise softened by distance. "I want to know what you need," he said, "not from me as someone with power, but as a man." The question caught me off guard with its simplicity. "I need consistency," I said after a moment, "and honesty and time." He nodded without hesitation. "You'll have all three." We stood there for a long moment, the night wrapping around us gently. When he reached for my hand, it was slow, deliberate, unmistakable. I let my fingers curl around his. The contact was warm, grounding, not secretive, not rushed, just real. The following days brought challenges, subtle tensions, quiet resistance from corners of the firm, where control had long gone unquestioned. Claire's remarks grew more pointed. Whispers circulated. Nothing concrete, nothing direct, until the meeting. It was a routine partners meeting on the surface. Agenda items, quarterly reviews, procedural updates. But beneath it all, something else waited to be named. A senior partner spoke of image, another of hierarchy. Someone mentioned boundaries without mentioning names. The room grew still. Jonathan listened without interruption. Then, calmly, he stood. "I'll speak plainly," he said. Every voice fell silent. "There has been speculation," he continued, "and subtle implication. I won't allow either to undermine professionalism or integrity." His gaze moved deliberately through the room before settling briefly on me. Not possessive, not protective, respectful. "Elena Morales has conducted herself with absolute professionalism," he said clearly. "Her work stands on its own merit. Any suggestion otherwise reflects more on the speaker than on her." The impact was immediate. No raised voices, no argument, just truth stated without apology. When the meeting ended, the atmosphere had shifted irrevocably. Lines had been drawn, not in secrecy, but in daylight. Later, as the building emptied once more, Jonathan found me by my desk. "I hope that was okay," he said quietly. "It was more than okay," I replied. He studied me for a moment, then smiled, soft, unguarded. "I meant every word." "I know." That night, we didn't rush anywhere. We walked, we talked, we shared quiet laughter and long pauses. There was no need to define what we were becoming. The resolution was not in labels. It was in choice, in care, in the way we stood beside each other, without shrinking or hiding. And as I lay in my bed that night, sheets finally smoothed, body relaxed, heart steady, I understood something clearly. Love does not always arrive as a storm. Sometimes it arrives as calm after long endurance. And that calm, when earned, can carry more power than anything loud or fleeting. Surrender is often misunderstood. People think it means losing yourself, giving up ground, dissolving into someone else. But what I learned, slowly, deliberately, and without spectacle, was that real surrender feels nothing like collapse. It feels like standing still long enough to stop fighting what is already true. The days after the meeting carried a new weight. Not heaviness, clarity. Jonathan and I no longer moved around each other with hesitation sharpened by fear. We moved with care sharpened by choice. That difference changed everything. There was no dramatic shift in behavior, no sudden declarations, no stolen moments that felt reckless or rushed. Instead, there was something far more intimate. Consistency. The quiet reassurance of showing up the same way, every day. He checked in without hovering. I spoke freely without shrinking. We trusted the space between us, and in that space emotion deepened beyond desire. One evening, after a long day that had drained the building of its usual urgency, Jonathan asked if I would walk with him. Not away from the city this time, but through it, through the noise, the lights, the ordinary life that continued regardless of what had changed between us. We walked without destination, side by side, sometimes close enough that our arms brushed, sometimes with a little distance, the kind that allows thoughts to breathe. "I spent a long time believing that wanting less would hurt less," he said eventually. I looked at him, really looked at him, in the glow of a passing streetlight. "Did it?" He shook his head. "It just made everything smaller." The honesty of that answer stayed with me. We stopped near a quiet street, where the city softened into something almost gentle. He turned toward me, his expression open, unguarded. "I don't want to live half awake anymore," he said. "Not with you, not with anything." The words settled slowly, not as pressure, but as offering. I thought of everything it had taken for me to get here, every dismissal I had absorbed, every moment I had chosen silence over risk, every time I had told myself survival was enough. "It hasn't been easy for me either," I said, "letting myself want something this fully." He nodded. "That's why I won't ask you to give up who you are for this." "I wouldn't," I replied gently, "and neither would you." That understanding, clear, mutual, felt like a threshold quietly crossed. When he reached for my hand, there was no hesitation left in me. My fingers slid into his with ease, with familiarity that felt earned rather than assumed. The contact was steady, grounding, not symbolic, real. From that night on, something inside me relaxed. Not vigilance, not awareness, but resistance. I stopped bracing for loss that hadn't arrived. At work, the atmosphere continued to evolve. People adjusted, not with celebration, not with confrontation, but with acceptance. Authority rebalanced. Tensions softened where truth had replaced speculation. Jonathan never spoke over me, never framed my presence as an extension of his own. In meetings, he listened, deferred when appropriate, allowed space. That respect mattered more than any gesture behind closed doors. And in private, the intimacy deepened, not in intensity alone, but in trust. One night, weeks later, I found myself in his apartment for the first time. It wasn't planned, not deliberately. A late evening, rain again, a conversation that didn't feel finished. The space was quiet, understated, clean but lived in, the kind of place shaped by routine more than indulgence. Books lined the shelves. A framed photograph rested on a side table, turned slightly away, not hidden, but not displayed either. He noticed my gaze and said quietly, "I keep it there because it's part of my life, but it doesn't define what comes next." "I understand," I replied. We sat on opposite ends of the sofa at first, talking about ordinary things, about nothing that needed resolution. The rain tapped softly against the windows, steady and patient. At some point, the space between us closed naturally, not with urgency, with gravity. I leaned back against the cushions, my head resting against the back of the sofa. Jonathan sat beside me, close enough that our thighs touched. His arm rested along the back, not pulling me in, just there. My body responded quietly. Warmth, awareness, ease. "How you don't have to be careful right now," he said softly. "Just honest." I turned my head to look at him. "I am." He studied my face as if committing it to memory, not with hunger but with attention, the kind that listens even in silence. When he kissed me, it was different from before. Still gentle, still unhurried, but deeper. There was no question in it this time, no testing, just presence, acceptance, a quiet affirmation of what we had already chosen. I rested my hand against his neck, feeling the warmth of his skin, the steady pulse beneath my fingertips. His breath deepened, matching mine, bodies aligning without urgency or demand. We didn't rush toward anything else. We stayed there, on the sofa, shoes forgotten, jackets discarded, the room warm with shared breath and quiet closeness. When I rested my head against his shoulder, he leaned his cheek lightly against my hair. "I don't feel like I'm losing control," he said after a while. "I feel like I'm finally using it to choose." An emotion pressed into my chest, full, steady, overwhelming in its calm. "That's what surrender feels like," I said. Not later, not all at once, but eventually we moved, slowly, naturally, toward the bedroom. There was no threshold crossed in urgency, no need to dim the lights or announce the moment. The bed was simple, the sheets cool at first, then warm beneath us. Clothes were set aside without ceremony. The air carried the scent of rain and skin and familiarity that had not yet existed, but somehow already felt known. We lay close, bodies aligned, breath steady. The sheets shifted beneath us, rumpling as we moved, not with haste, but with intention. Heat gathered, not as fire, but as something deeper, sustained, grounded. There was no rush to erase distance, no need to prove anything, just closeness. His forehead rested against mine. His hand moved slowly along my back, not claiming, not demanding, just present. My fingers traced the line of his shoulder, the warmth of him steady beneath my touch. So time stretched. When we finally rested, sweat cooling on skin, sheets tangled beneath us, it felt less like an ending and more like a beginning allowed to breathe. I lay with my head on his chest, listening to his heart, steady and real. His arm curved around me, protective without possession. "This doesn't scare me," he said quietly. "It doesn't scare me either," I replied. And that was the truth. In the days that followed, life didn't simplify, but it steadied. We navigated routines together, mornings that began quietly, evenings that didn't demand explanation, conversations that held space for uncertainty without being ruled by it. I didn't feel smaller beside him. I felt expanded. Surrender, I realized, was not about giving myself away. It was about allowing myself to stay, fully, honestly, without retreat. And as I fell asleep one night with his arm around me, the city murmuring softly outside the window, I understood that this calm, this warmth, this shared presence was not the absence of struggle. It was the result of choosing through it. Happiness does not arrive all at once. It settles. It learns the shape of your life, your mornings, your silences. It grows roots instead of fireworks. And when you finally notice it, you realize it has been there all along, quietly holding everything together. The weeks that followed our first true surrender did not soften the world around us. Work remained demanding, expectations stayed high. The city never slowed for love, and yet Jonathan and I moved through it all with a steadiness neither of us had known before. Not because life had become easier, but because we no longer faced it alone. Mornings began differently now, not rushed, not empty. Sometimes we woke together, sunlight spilling across the room, sheets still warm and loosely tangled. Other times we parted early, exchanging nothing more than a look and a quiet smile that said everything words no longer needed to explain. There was passion, yes, but it no longer burned with uncertainty, it glowed. The kind of passion that lives in small gestures. His hand at my lower back when we crossed the street, my fingers brushing his wrist when I passed him a document. The way our eyes always found each other in a room without effort. At the firm, the shift became undeniable. Jonathan's leadership had changed, not weakened but deepened. His authority now carried something human, something grounded. People listened differently, spoke differently. The atmosphere, once sharp with ambition and distance, began to breathe. And I changed too. I no longer questioned whether I belonged. I spoke with clarity. I took space without apology. I had learned that confidence does not need to announce itself. It settles quietly. Like truth, Claire stopped making comments. Not because she had softened, but because she had understood. The power she once wielded through insinuation had dissolved in the presence of something she could not control. Transparency. One evening after a long day, Jonathan asked me to walk with him again. The city was bright, alive, full of movement. We walked without destination, letting the rhythm of the streets guide us. "I've been thinking about what comes next," he said. I looked at him, already knowing this conversation mattered. "So have I replied. He stopped near a small square, the noise of the city softened by distance. His expression was calm, open, no hesitation, no armor. "I spent years believing that my life had already reached its peak," he said, "that everything ahead would be maintenance, survival, responsibility. And now?" I asked softly. "And now," he continued, "I realize I was wrong. What I had was not an ending, it was an interruption." Emotion rose in my chest, warm and steady. "I don't want to return to who I was before you," he said. Not because that man was broken, but because he was incomplete. I felt my throat tighten, not with fear, but with recognition. "You didn't complete me," I said gently. "You reminded me I was allowed to want more." He smiled then, fully, openly, without restraint. That night we talked longer than planned, about childhood, about dreams deferred, about mistakes neither of us regretted anymore because they had led us here. Later, when we lay together in quiet closeness, bodies warm and relaxed, the sheets soft beneath us, the city murmuring outside the window, I rested my head against his chest and felt something settle permanently into place. Not urgency, not hunger, belonging. Months passed, not marked by milestones but by consistency. Jonathan and I learned each other's rhythms. We learned how to disagree without distance, how to give space without withdrawing, how to hold each other through fatigue without needing to fix everything. One evening, he brought me to a small restaurant tucked away from the city's louder pulse. Candlelight, soft conversation, no spectacle. After dinner, we walked along the river, the water reflecting broken lines of light. "I don't believe in dramatic gestures," he said quietly. "I believe in decisions." I smiled. "So do I." He stopped walking. "Eleanor," he said, turning to face me fully, "I want to choose you publicly, clearly, without hesitation." My heart slowed, not racing, not startled, just deeply, undeniably present. "I want to build a life with you," he continued. "Not a perfect one, a real one where we grow older still curious about each other, one where love isn't a secret or a risk, but a foundation." He didn't kneel. He didn't raise his voice. He simply held my hands and waited. Yes, I said. The word didn't tremble. It didn't need to. Our wedding was small, intimate, honest. No spectacle, no excess. Just people who mattered. Light filtering through tall windows. Music that felt like breathing. Jonathan stood beside me, his expression calm and full, as if he had finally arrived somewhere he recognized. I wore something simple, something that felt like me. No disguise, no performance. When we exchanged vows, there were no promises of perfection, only truth. I promise presence, he said. I promise courage, I replied. That was enough. Life after marriage did not become quieter, but it became warmer. Mornings were filled with ordinary chaos. Coffee brewing, shoes misplaced, laughter slipping in between responsibilities. Evenings settled into shared meals, shared silence, shared rest. Jonathan's son became part of my life not through ceremony, but through routine. Homework at the table, quiet conversations before bed. Trust built slowly, gently, without pressure. One night as I tucked him in, he looked at me and said without hesitation, "Good night, Mom." The word landed softly and stayed. Jonathan watched from the doorway, his eyes full, his expression peaceful. Later, when we sat together in the living room, he took my hand and pressed it to his chest. "I didn't think I could feel this whole again," he said. "Neither did I replied. Time continued, as it always does. The firm evolved. Jonathan stepped back from certain responsibilities, stepping into others. I grew into my role, no longer as an exception, but as a leader in my own right. We welcomed a daughter into our lives, tiny, loud, perfect in her imperfection. Holding her for the first time, I felt the full weight of the journey that had brought me there. Not luck, not rescue, choice. Our home filled with laughter, with mess, with life. Some nights after the children slept, Jonathan and I sat together in quiet closeness. No agenda, no urgency, just presence. Sometimes our hands found each other. Sometimes we simply breathed side by side. Desire never left us. It matured. It lived in looks across the room, in shared smiles, in the warmth of bodies resting together at the end of long days, in sheets gently rumpled by closeness that no longer needed to prove itself. One evening, years later, Jonathan stood behind me as I washed dishes, his arms resting loosely around my waist. He pressed his cheek against my hair. "I once told you my pain was too big," he said softly. I leaned back into him. "I remember." "I was wrong," he continued. "Love was bigger." I turned in his arms, meeting his gaze. "So was you choosing to face it." We kissed then, not urgent, not searching, just full. A kiss shaped by time, by trust, by the knowledge that we had built something that endured. As I lay in bed that night, our home quiet, our lives full, I thought of the woman I had been, the one who learned early how to endure. She had survived, but this woman had lived. And the love that carried me here was not loud or dramatic. It was steady, passionate, deep. It was the kind of love that does not fade. It becomes home. If this were your life, if you were standing where I stood, feeling what I felt, what would you have done? Tell me in the comments. I truly want to know. If this story touched you, leave a like, subscribe to the channel, and help me keep telling these intense, beautiful stories of love and courage. Thank you for walking this journey with me. Your presence here means more than you know.